Hello and welcome everyone to the Pre-2.5.0 balance patch survey analysis. I've done these surveys for a long time on Reddit, but finally we're doing it in video format. So I hope you guys enjoy this one. I am joined by the one and only Freshlobster, one of the, I think you can really debate it, one of the best players in Runeterra just from tournament results. He has a very strong case. So hopefully he gets to give us some insight and some pro player opinions as well on the results. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Panda.
You're welcome, my friend. It's a great experience. I think I'll be maybe inviting different people as I do these different surveys to have like a lot of different opinions. So I'm glad you're the first. I think it's quite fitting. But we'll move on now to the actual results. This is regional power level to start things off. This is kind of the survey goes over a few things: champions, regional power levels, a few other different factors, but this is, I think, the most important one, just to look at the regions as a whole. And I'll quickly go over the kind of glaring results here, and then we can kind of discuss more in depth. Targon, to no one's surprise, is leading the pack. It has, I think it was like close to a 4.6 rating, which is as high as Shadow Owl had during this Allegiance meta, where Rasa and Ledros, and that was one of the strongest decks, I think, in Runeterra's history. So the same level, which is obviously a very strong one, and we can probably expect nerfs. Bilgewater, because of TF Fizz and mostly TF, is also pretty high up there, almost at 4, but not quite. But definitely an outlier. I think anyone, any region at this level ends up getting nerfs from the past results. And it's mostly TF. I think, Nab and Plunder and Deep, those archetypes are not really in the picture, but TF definitely is, and we definitely expect to see nerfs on him as well. Looking at Shadow Isles, it's always been top 3. I think it's one of the most versatile regions, one of the kind of you can build so many different decks with it, and it fits in so many different archetypes, so it's always going to be around. The card pool is very, very strong for Shadow Isles. Freljord, PNZ, and Noxus, kind of in the middle, not really a problem. Demacia, Shurima, and Ionia do have a bit of a problem. I think Demacia has some strong decks, but overall, we see it have maybe a boring playstyle. Maybe a lot of the new champions like Jarvan and Shyvana haven't had an impact, so it's been kind of the same stuff for the past year, basically, with Scouts and Shenfiora. Shurima is incomplete, so I think it's not too weird to see it very low at the bottom, even though it has some strong champs. It has some weak ones like Talia and some archetypes that are very clearly not fleshed out. And Ionia, I think we don't have to analyze too much. It's in a pretty bad spot outside of Lee Sin. So to start things off, Lobster, we're talking about Targon. What are your initial opinions? I imagine you have a lot of them on this region right now.
Absolutely. I mean, the result is not really surprising, and I'm also not surprised that it gets pretty close to the maximum score at a 4.6 rating. Targon being in almost every tier 1 deck and also having good matchups into most of the tier 1 decks, besides TFS, of course. Super flexible, can play at any speed. Also very, it has a high skill cap, therefore the better you pilot it, the more rewarding it is to play Targon. No big surprise there. Definitely deserves a bit of the nerf hammer. I'm going to be curious to see which cards exactly get touched and to what extent.
And when we look at the controversial card ratings and the champions, we can get a much better picture of what the kind of main problems are, even though I think as a whole, a lot of, not all the cards, because there are certain, maybe not archetypes, but certain pockets of cards that aren't really played much at all, and clearly are not really part of the problem. But I think overall the Invoke package and the value you get, I think people really look at Invoke as just the Celestials cards being kind of overtuned, and you're paying kind of a tempo loss cost with things like Solari Priestess or lower statted bodies to create these Celestials. But I think it's also the card advantage aspect of it, where you're getting a free card that gives you so much value. You're not having to draw, but it's essentially the same thing, maybe even better, because you're targeting the draw in a way. I think that's one of the bigger problems with Targon as well. So we'll see if there's just going to be Aphelios nerfs, or if it's going to be, kind of the whole region looked at, and maybe even the whole Invoke keyword looked at, because it is clearly very impactful in the meta. And like you said, it helps, especially at the high end, at the very competitive level, where you're able to make so many decisions. It really gives you an edge, I think. And you're able to stall the game so effectively with healing, with card advantage, etc. It's one of the bigger problems. Moving on to Bilgewater. It is also a problematic region, but I think that's pretty much solely because of TF. We saw Go Hard before with TF and a draw package from Bilgewater cards like Zap Sprayfin being a problem. Now it's TF Fizz, but I think we both agree it's really just TF, because looking at the rest of Bilgewater, we see the Plunder package, even things like Riptide Rex as a finisher, etc., not really being played. We see Plunder and Nab. Obviously, Nab, the nerfs to it made it kind of impossible to play as well. The whole Sejuani archetype with Nab doesn't really exist anymore. And Deep is also in a pretty bad spot right now. Do you have anything to add to that opinion? Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I'm a bit surprised to see Bilgewater getting such high scores, and I think it's mainly the reflection of the frustration with the current meta. Like you said, it's really just the draw package around TF and the Burblefish cards. And Bilgewater in and by itself just doesn't do that much. It's mainly a good supplementary region. It, of course, synergizes super well with PNZ, and I guess another reason why it might be so high up is just Boxtopus existing, but Bilgewater on its own not being able to benefit from it enough, at least, outside of Aphelios, just pulling him for the 2-mana 3/4 challenger. And I mean, it's also it's a Targon deck that just splashes one Bilgewater card, but it's probably adding
kind of to the presence of Bilgewater in the meta.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that really is all we have to say about Bilgewater. It is kind of TF, the region of TF, and that's really it. And if TF gets changes, then hopefully, and maybe Deep gets some buffs again, maybe Drug Judgers gets buffed again, because I don't know why that card was ever nerfed. I think everyone enjoys Deep, so I think it would be welcome to see some buffs maybe to that archetype as well, to make it once again not tier 1, but at least tier 2 or somewhat playable. Moving on to Shadow Isles. This is a region that has been around, as far as Runeterra has been out, basically. It's always been either the strongest or in the top 3, just simply due to the fact that its champions aren't really that strong. We have some, fairly weak champions, actually, with things like Thresh and Callista never really being, they're playable, of course, in their own archetypes, but never really being, superstars of the meta. It's more the cards, I think, and a lot of the cards are just really well statted. They fit into so many different archetypes. You have burn strategies with spiders and things like Doombeast. You have Nightfall's its own little archetype. You have the healing package and Grasp and Withering Wail and removal with Black Spear, Vengeance, etc. Ruination. It has just a very versatile card pool, and it's really gonna always be, I think, top 3, because it might combine with different regions as different regions go up and down, but I think Shadow Isles is almost impossible to not be a very relevant region in Runeterra.
Yeah, very true. It's like you said, a very versatile region, but it's also good at everything it does. So the aggro package of Shadow Isles is one of the best in the game, either as a mono deck like Fearsomes or like paired with PNZ or Noxus as burn packages. And then Shadow Isles also has one of the best control packages in the game with the Vengeance Ruination cards. Only Freljord getting any close to contention there with Freljord's own AoE removal. But yeah, Shadow Isles being able to be played as both a mono region as well as a great supplementary region.
And speaking of Freljord, right now its biggest impact in the meta is obviously Lissandra when she came out. She's maybe the most impactful new champion that released in the recent expansion with Shurima, even though she's not a Shurima card, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. But it kind of put, I think, the Trundle, Tryndamere, FTR, Freljord, Shadow Isles control list, that shell, back into the meta, the same way that kind of pre-Trundle was, I think, where it was that impactful, especially the early 2 weeks. And outside of that, Freljord, has some Overwhelm synergies with Sejuani and Renekton and some other decks. But really, with Ashe being out of the meta because of TF Fizz, and yeah, I think that's really the only archetype we're seeing. Is there anything else I'm missing, other than maybe like Endure a little bit over Nasus, but not really, I think? Do you think there's any other big deck outside of Lissandra?
Not really. Some people are trying to pair it with Swain, for example. Mm-hmm. Also, some Noxus, Shurima, Overwhelm hybrids. But overall, Freljord just always having been a staple region. The mono Freljord Overwhelm archetype has never been quite that playable. Mostly just paired as a control package or an aggro Overwhelm package. But I could see Freljord getting a significant power spike depending on the meta shifting, because an archetype like Ashe would do super duper well into a mid-range meta, but of course gets held back like crazy by aggressive burn decks like TF Fizz.
Great minds think alike. In the write-up I did for Reddit that I'll be posting alongside the video, I pointed out the exact same thing. Once TF Fizz disappears, if it does disappear, then I think Ashe, with the addition of LeBlanc, and Ashe Prospect has always been a very strong deck, even though it hasn't been maybe as publicly oppressive, people really complaining about it or anything. It's always been a very high winner deck, a good tournament deck, and now if TF Fizz disappears, or at least, goes down to a more manageable level, I think it can definitely make a big splash. Looking at PNZ, I think we can agree that most of this rating comes down to just its co-star appearance, its Robin-like appearance in TF Fizz. The region itself still has a lot of problems with, it has some good things, of course, like Mystic Shot, Beam, these very key removal options that are always going to be relevant. But it has so many cards that are unplayable. I think alongside Ionia, one of the regions that has the most cards that just don't see any play at all. And the same goes for champions. Very weak champion pool now with Heimerdinger, Vi, and I guess Victor. Although he's seeing some play with Aphelios, but that's mostly, I think, Aphelios' thing. It's a region that I think, with TF Fizz, it kind of got brought up a bit with Ballistic Bot, but it's still a region that needs addressing, I think, from the devs in the long run.
Yeah, like you said, PNZ is kind of polarized between super good and super bad cards. We have cards like Ballistic Bot, one of the newest additions that also can pop off completely. Stress Testing, Poro Cannon have all been good additions, but overall the region is always lacking a certain something and therefore only succeeds in combination with some other archetypes. Therefore, I'm not quite sure yet what it is missing. Sometimes it feels like it's the punch through power, the big finishers, basically. Sometimes it feels like it's just not enough hard removal. Maybe we'll see more PNZ once the meta shifts, even though TFS will be gone. But it does have some tools to deal effectively with certain aggro and mid-range archetypes due to the high amount of removal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and very efficient removal as well, where you can you're not wasting any mana points when you're removing, and that's I think what makes it so good and very versatile. You can not only deal with aggro, but also you have Beam to deal with more mid-range lists or more control lists as well. So that's what I think it's definitely it's highlighting factor. I think looking at Noxus, it fell a bit. I think Noxus is still a very versatile region, and I think it's been one of the most underrated regions in the history of Runeterra, to be honest. Especially maybe not at the very beginning, but because it was kind of just go face and that was it. But after a few cards got added, I think it really became kind of like a mini Shadow Isles in some ways, in a different package, of course. I think it did fall a bit because one, Ash Frostbite fell and Swain fell because Equinox on Leviathan is a thing, and other factors I think as well. But I think it definitely has, like Freljord, the possibility to jump up a bit once TFS disappears a bit, or Targon, maybe Equinox gets changed or something gets changed to make it a bit more appealing to play, because the aggro is still there, with Burn Spiders, with Ezreal Draven might make a comeback when TFS gets nerfed as well, etc. Do you agree with that statement?
Definitely. Right now, I think Noxus mainly sees play in certain aggro and burn decks, but the region has more to offer. It's just not very suited in the meta. The problem with the controlling part of Noxus, with the Swain Leviathan package and so on, is that it does not have access to healing, and therefore does struggle against burn decks or decks like TFS with access to a lot of chip damage. And also, like you said, cards like Equinox, certain hard removal, just taking out the key units. But if the meta shifts to a more mid-rangey type of style, cards like Ravenous Flock, Arachnoid Sentry are going to be insane control tools. They just don't do enough against decks like TFS or other burn decks, but another region that might be on the rise if we see a large shift in the meta.
We should have regional stocks that we can invest in, and then when things get nerfed, we profit. I'll try and think of a way to implement that. Looking at Demacia, it's an interesting region. I think maybe much of this rating is that it's just unpopular. We'll look at Thematic later in the flavor aspect of it, but it's always been a very vanilla region, and I guess that's normal. I think it's just big stats and big dudes and kind of not too exciting of a prospect, I think. But the region itself, I think, Fiora Shen obviously incredibly dominating in ladder, good win rate, and in tournaments, very, very good as well. Very flexible deck that doesn't have any weaknesses. And we've had some decks come and go, some elite stuff. We had Scouts, of course, is the second main, I think, culprit. We had Lucian Azir as well, with Lucian on the rise as well, with the Azir combination once Shurima released. But other than that, Jarvan and his whole maybe attempt at an archetype not really working out. Garen kind of forgotten. Lux very forgotten. And Shyvana did not fail to make really much of a splash with their whole dragon archetype as well. So I think it's just the biggest thing is that it hasn't really had a big thing to kind of reinvigorate the region in a long time, and it's still kind of coasting because it has two very strong decks that are going to always be meta if they don't get changed, but it has no excitement to it. So players maybe it's not the actual power level. I think it might not be this low, but through boredom and through like no change, players are just saying, all right, this region kind of sucks.
Yeah, good point there. Demacia has kind of always been there, but it's never been overwhelmingly good or
Grand Plaza,
surprising.
I forgot to mention Grand Plaza. It came and went, but that was like a 1 month window where actually Demacia was, I think, second in ratings last survey. So, but that's very clearly just Grand Plaza doing its thing, not really other cards or decks.
That is true. Yeah, the only ones that are consistently in the meta are Fiora, Shen, and MF Scouts, I guess. Yeah, the thing about Demacia is that it always feels kind of fair. You have well-statted units, but you don't have these absolutely crazy interactions, crazy win conditions, outside of maybe Mono Fiora, which is a bit of a very polarizing deck, love it or hate it. But the rest of Demacia is, like you said, kind of vanilla, straightforward, and therefore nothing too flashy that really frustrates people for these surveys enough.
Well, Fiora Shen frustrates me, but
that's true.
That's a different
That's an exception.
Me and I think a lot of other people. So hopefully someday Fiora gets a change or the archetype stops getting great cards added every expansion. Maybe that would be a good idea, like Sharpsight and Screeching Dragon and Golden Aegis. But we'll see.
Oh, yeah.
Shurima, again, we mentioned it. It's an incomplete region. Obviously, we've seen one set come out. It's still missing a lot of cards. So I think a lot of archetypes and champions, maybe they're doomed already, like Talia, but maybe they're just missing pieces that would come in later on. So I think it's not really much to talk about here. It's just incomplete, and there really isn't much more to add other than that. There are some strong champions that have had good ratings in the champion section, like Nasus and Sivir and Azir especially. Mostly due to play rate, I think, with Azir, with how popular he was in so many different aggro strategies. But yeah, incomplete region, so I think we can't really fairly analyze it at this point. Ionia, we can analyze though. It's had a lot of problems. It used to be very strong with the elusive package. That got nerfed to the ground over several patches, just constantly nerfing stuff. And it was warranted, I think, at the time maybe. But right now, it's Lee Sin. Which is just its own little thing. I think you can almost be a different region with Lee Sin because it's a lot of Targon as well. It's Shen as a side character in Fiora Shen and some Ionia cards there, but really just Notify and Deny kind of doing their own thing as their own unique little, well, not unique now with Rite of Negation, but kind of. And the rest of it is just has a lot of problems with Lulu especially and the support archetype altogether. So anything else to add to maybe why these problems are or what it needs in the future?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Ionia, maybe it's about time to start reverting some earlier nerfs to get the power level back up. But Ionia also is a region that has a couple of kind of unique effects to it. Karma, I think, being a great example of it. A champion that is very hard to balance and maybe in need of a rework and certain aspects of Ionia in general. Because Karma is a card where whenever you add new cards to the game, you have to be worried, like, could this interaction be completely broken when it's being double cast? And therefore, it's very hard to balance Karma with the passive skill she has to be appropriate in the meta. And another thing about Ionia is it is also a very high skill cap region, I'd say, a very controlling and reactive region. You need to think about a lot of interactions. And the payoff, even for piloting it super well, is just not high enough. It would at max be average.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I was going to mention, reactive I think is the right word to talk about with talking about Ionia. This is supposed to be a 30-minute video. We're at minute 20 right now, so it ain't gonna happen. Let's aim for an hour, Lobster, and try and maybe condense a little bit more.
All right.
So this is the end of the regional power level. I think the results are pretty obviously stated here, and we've analyzed it a bit. We're gonna go now to regional and thematic satisfaction. So this includes kind of the flavor aspect, the deck diversity aspect, the identity of the region, and really just maybe if you would ask, players, what's your favorite region? What region do you enjoy playing with? Not just because it's a broken region or very strong, but because you like the flavor and the themes and the identity behind them. And I'll just quickly, I think, go through everything and let me know if you have any strong opinions you want to share. Shadow Isles has always been pretty much number one, with Bilgewater, Rising Tides when it came out with Deep also being, I think, maybe took number one or was, that top two. And again, no surprise, same reasons I gave in the power level aspect. It's just very versatile. I think has very good flavor and good just you can build so many different decks, so many different archetypes. They all kind of work and it's just a good flavor and theme, I think, with the champions, even with the least, with, just a lot of what you want to build. It really works with Ledros as well. Just cool cards as well. Like if Demacia is boring and just but vanilla, big sided dude, Shadow Isles has, the cool factor, which sounds a bit maybe juvenile, but it's relevant. Maybe subconsciously, but it is relevant. Freljord is a surprising one. I think maybe players just enjoy Lissandra and the aspect of the Watcher combo and controlling the board. They got a lot of kind of thematic controls with Blighted Ravine and Ice Shard. And if you enjoy that playstyle, then I think you'd be happy with how Freljord is right now. I don't really enjoy it, which is why I'm surprised to see it so high, and especially with Ashe not really being relevant and with there not being that many archetypes for Freljord. Do you have any opinions on why you think this may be that it's so high? Lobster? I believe you have disappeared from both, from everywhere. Lobster is missing in action, so I will continue without him because I'm not going to do a retake.
All right, sorry, I'm back. I think you just need to reactivate the camera or something.
Back.
There it is.
Everything's fixed.
Perfect.
All right. I was about to
German internet.
German internet, the excuse is already there. I was asking you about Freljord, about what you think about this region being so highly rated right now at the second spot.
I have to admit, I personally kind of agree. I like the flavor of Freljord. I think just stylistically, the whole region makes sense. Everything in snow, everything's like with these big overwhelmed creatures and so on. I don't know what if it's just like the addition of certain cards, like you said, Lissandra, and maybe cards like Blighted Ravine, which just give another dimension to the playstyle itself. Mm-hmm. Because Blighted Ravine plays at a card speed basically that we didn't really have before, with a cooldown and trigger at the end of turn.
Yeah.
And maybe people also like the addition of cards like Ice Shard, just adding more control-y aspects to Freljord as well, and therefore making the region almost as versatile as Shadow Isles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, just maybe missing the kind of the deck archetype versatility where it has many different strategies, because I mean, there's Overwhelm and there's maybe Ashe if she returns, but other than like a control shell, I'm not sure how much more there is, which is why I was a bit surprised. But the people have spoken. So Freljord number 2. Shurima, actually, I was surprised, and it's a good surprise to see a new region come in that's still incomplete, but that the themes and identity people like a lot, with maybe Egyptian themes and the champions even maybe from League, kind of those contrasts. So it's nice to see. I think it's refreshing because a lot of these regions have had problems with having a good people, not just playing them because they're good, but playing them because they like them. So I'm happy to see Shurima rated so highly, even though it's incomplete. Maybe it'll rise more. Maybe the identity with Mono Shurima will get better with Talia. I know you played a lot with Timo, but maybe other people will play it with more competitive decks. But
shots fired.
And maybe Nasus as well, I think, is a cool card with how it works with a spell shield, and it has, I think, also a lot of that cool factor that Shadow Isles has with Renekton, especially maybe even the champion level ups. Those that can make people want to play there's a lot of stuff that people don't really factor in with play rates and stuff. It's not just win rate, it's also just how the decks feel and the identity and everything. So I'm happy to see Shurima so high up actually with a new release.
Yeah, for sure. And also the addition of certain new mechanics and exploring certain new aspects of the game. For example, the Talia archetype, albeit not being very strong, it explores the whole landmark theme. It's just another aspect to the game. And the predict cards, for example, as well. I could see the addition of Zillion making a competitive deck out of this, but it also just feels good to have more consistency in your games and also more impact on the outcome of the games with deciding which card you'll draw next.
Now, Lobster, has Zillion been announced officially? No leaks. No leaks in my channel, please.
My bad.
Okay. Everyone knows, I think, already. No one was able to avoid the leaks.
I mean, yeah, the cards are so obvious. What can you do? The package is already half there.
Looking at Noxus, a bit surprised to see it so high. I think it's not so much Noxus being high and being fourth. It's more the other regions being low. And we're gonna move into, I think, there's not much to say about Noxus. I think it's better than it was before. It's still under 3, which is not great, obviously. I think overall, with the deck diversity in the meta right now, people are feeling not too inspired in general. Because when a deck's very good, then you don't play anything else in that region, and it causes some problems, of course. So not too much to mention about Noxus. I think it's not so much it doing good. It's more Targon, Piltover and Zon, and Bilgewater. The next 3 regions in the ratings being just single deck focus, and those decks being kind of the villains in the current meta. It means that the entire region, the appeal and the identity and the top of mind perception of players will be negative, of course. So we can pack all 3 of those, I think, together. Maybe Piltover and Zon has more problems with, we mentioned before, just its card pool and some of the champions, etc. And Bilgewater as well, with Deep and Nab and Plunder. But Targon is more just, it's the villain. It used to be very high rated, like top 3, same as Bilgewater, but both have plummeted in this survey, I think, just because of these decks.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that's more a reflection of the current frustration with the decks from these archetypes. I mean, if we remember when Targon first came out, everyone was amazed by the beautiful design, the music, the boards, the cards. They're just so pretty.
I never liked the Invoke stuff. The stalling the game is not. I know you love, from the Fight Night tournaments, stalling the tournaments so they last 4 hours more and I have to cast till midnight. But I do not enjoy it. I like aggro. I like spiders. I like games that are engaging and don't require 70,000 decisions. But you're right. It was popular region when it came out. It was liked, and that has changed, I think, drastically. In as we got along, it just started plummeting lower, lower, lower with like Lee Sin, with Sparklefly, with Zoe, and et cetera, and obviously Hush, maybe being the card that's going to get the most nerfs in the history of Runeterra. Just continue going down till it's 6 mana and still played. And then
yeah, I agree.
Demacia and Ionia, we talked about it before. I think it's just the blandness of it for Demacia and kind of the vanilla of it and not having anything new the past year. And Ionia, it's the power level, which not always, but in some cases, obviously, is going to be if the region's not powerful, not worth playing, not competitive, or not just competitive, but you can't get any kind of a good win rate with it, then obviously you're not going to play and the identity in your top of mind kind of disappears. But I think that covers everything from thematic satisfaction. We will now move on to the champions, the top 15 champions. Are we ready? Who's number 1, Lobster? Well, you already know, so I'm not going to ask that question.
I mean, it's pretty obvious, isn't it?
Number 1 with the highest ever champion rating in the survey's history. So I'm just going to say in the game's history because my surveys are canon, at least from a community perspective. 4.80 rating, highest ever. The other highest have always been around the 4.55 to 4.60 range when Hecarim pre-nerf with the Allegiance meta with Shadows at the very beginning. Aphelios now is at that range as well, but 4.80 is unheard of. And I think Twisted Fate rightfully deserves a spot with the one turn level up that we're seeing quite often in TF Fizz.
Yeah, most definitely. Just the addition of a couple of new cards pushing this champion with a very high potential and very high payoff if you build a deck around him, just over the edge, and people are getting frustrated from seeing him every other game just dominating the whole board.
And quickly, just to mention, especially now with champions and card ratings, the way the survey works, usually if a card is rated above a 4, that means it's going to get nerfed. It's not I'm not a psychic, but it usually gets nerfed after that, or it's definitely on the watches and gets nerfed the balance patch after that if it continues being a problem. From 3.80 to around, but this is more for controversial cards, not so much champions. From 3.80 to 4 is definitely like watch list territory or nerfs, and 3.5 to 3.8 is problematic, but not necessarily oppressive or strong. Cards can be strong and kind of they need to be sometimes in certain regions, so it's kind of more admissible. But going back to the champions here, Twisted Fate, expect a nerf. Aphelios, definitely expect a nerf as well. 4.6, very impactful entry into the meta as well. Even after the 1 health nerf, which did nothing, as we can all see, because Aphelios is not about his own body, but all the value he gets from his moon weapons. And that combination with Veil Temple coming out and just Targon as a region really put it just well over the top, I think.
Yeah, and Aphelios is a tough one to tweak, though. Like, a lot of other cards would have been killed by getting their health reduced from 3 to 2, but Targon just having the right tools to protect Aphelios nonetheless and getting the infinite value out of him. But yeah, it's hard to tweak numbers without reworking them. I'm sure it's kind of evident if Aphelios needs a tweak. I'm just curious to what the developers are actually having in mind.
And the big thing is that I think Targon was already considered very strong, or the strongest region before Aphelios, and then Aphelios came out, and then Temple came out, and it just started adding on and piling on, kind of the same way that Fiora Shen has as a deck, where it was already very strong, and they got Sharp Sight, Screeching Dragon, Aegis, etc. Just has more and more cards that are making it more and more optimal and pushing that power level higher and higher. So, and that's also perfect transition to Fiora being the 3rd rated champion. In my opinion, maybe not deserving this spot. Maybe it's not, but it is a champion that's unfun to play against. It's always been meta, always been above a 3-point rating. Fiora Z, then Mono Fiora, then Fiora loses, and all kinds of stuff. And Fiora Shen now, and now Mono Fiora coming back to punish everyone that's trying to do new things. And when the expansion released, these degenerate Mono Fiora players like, all right, time to ruin everyone's day, time to screw aggro players, and then Shihu with his Targon Fiora list, adding on to that a little bit more. maybe he's just looking for a Fiora nerf, made an OP deck, and now it might happen because it's top 3 rated and it's definitely, I think, quite oppressive right now.
Yeah, Fiora is a weird one because the card in a vacuum and by herself is not that ridiculously strong, but you can build a very unfun deck around it, like a very uninteractive one, like Mono Fiora. Therefore, I don't really see it getting nerfed, even though it gets a very high rating here, but I definitely understand the frustration.
I forgot to mention Unyielding Spirit Fiora. That's a hard one to forget about.
The good old days,
I remember
yeah.
casting a game of 2 players with both Fiora's Unyielding Spirit, and we were just waiting for the decks to run out to see who would like mill themselves first. It was that bad. But yeah, those things have happened in this game's history, and we're still here. So I can very safely say that we're going to get past TF Fizz and Targon. We've gotten past some very strong things before as well. Lee Sin, not really a big spot in the meta right now, but is always going to be considered an unfun, an annoying, OTK kind of champion that you can't really do much against. Very polarized in its matchups against certain decks, and always just going to feel unfun. Zoe, very relevant now as Aphelios' side character, but still very relevant with the whole discussion with Invoke, especially the low cost Invokes, Crescent Strike, Equinox, just being very strong as a concept in general. I think Zoe just really highlights that even more, which is why she's so high up. And to round out the top 6, Lissandra is here as well, and I'm not surprised. The first 2 weeks of the new expansion, Trundle Lissandra was very strong, the Watcher combo was very strong, and also can be seen as annoying or unfun to play against if you don't have the right answers and if you're not able to end the game fast enough.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I noticed about all these 4 champions we just touched on, Fiora, Lee Sin, Zoe, and Lissandra, is that they provide alternative win conditions, which can kind of be abused in certain ways. Like for Fiora, it is the Unyielding Spirit package, the Mono Fiora one, Lee Sin Overwhelm, Zoe just sometimes being very hard to stop because of all the protective tools that Targon has, and Lissandra cheesing out the Watcher super early, and it just feels a bit uninteractive. It feels like you don't really have much agency sometimes, and you're still gonna get rolled by those win conditions. And I think that's what results in these high champion ratings, not necessarily the win rate and play rate itself.
I agree. Again, this survey is called Perception of Balance, not Balance, and that's something that's very key to highlight. Something that when I spoke to Ruben before with Progress Day, etc., I was happy to know that the devs are very aware of this, and I think it's something that a lot of devs miss. That it's not just looking at win rates and play rates and all this to balance. It's looking at the perception of balance, the unfun aspect. It was with Plunder the same thing. Plunder wasn't that, or not Plunder, Nab wasn't that strong, but it had this unfun aspect and created this whole discussion around it, which can sometimes be blown up out of proportion. Yes, because you highlight the negative and the kind of unfun and uninteractive and all this. But I agree that I think we're in agreement that it's not power level for these 4. It's more the way they win that is a bit more annoying. Looking at the rest of these champions, I think they're all pretty self-explanatory. Fizz and Trundle, I think, are very highly rated, more than they should be, just because they are the side characters in in some very strong decks. Same with Shen as well, with Fiora. I think they wouldn't be here if it wasn't for they don't really have decks outside of those pairings with TF or Fiora or Lissandra. Lucian and Azir are also surprisingly high, I think. Lucian has always been a strong champion, but Mystic Shot, so there's always been a kind of a counter, but it did find a very good shell with Azir, and Azir also felt a bit very strong with it. It had the right cards and synergies, and Cataclysm working, and some of the buffs and the stand soldiers, etc. It was very, maybe not oppressive, but very relevant in the first few weeks of the expansion. But I think these champions will definitely fall for the next survey, even if they're not changed, because I don't think the deck is really that strong.
Yeah, I agree. Lucian is another great example where the card itself is not the strongest, but if you don't have the right tools to prevent him from flipping right now, it's just an absolute blowout. And even if you draw a single Mystic Shot, sometimes they have Shaped Stone, Lucian survives and just does his thing. It can just be frustrating to play against. And for example, the last champion we see here, MF, I would personally say in a vacuum as a standalone card is stronger than a card like Fizz, but it's just that she doesn't see that much play right now. She doesn't dominate the meta the way Fizz does. And I think that explains a lot of these exact placements.
And Scouts is one of the archetypes now. Cosmic is highlighting this a lot on Twitter, that has a very high win rate, but not a high play rate. And I think a lot of it is just people being bored of playing because it's been a relevant deck for a long time, and it has a very clear strategy, but it's you can't really think outside the box with it, I think. And Misfortune did get a nerf recently, which is why she's fallen a bit, but the nerf was, I don't think, very relevant. The overwhelm wasn't, a key factor, I think. Draven also very strong, has always been a fair but strong and very relevant champion in a lot of different decks. So I think the last survey and this one, he's finally finding a consistent spot in the top spots, and I think he's not the flashiest champion, but he gets the job done in many different decks, and I think it's a deserved spot here. And Swain, always a scary champion with Leviathan, but I think has fallen off a lot in the meta, so also surprised to see him up here. And also Sivir. Sivir, strong, but hasn't seemed like a very dominant Shurima champion. She's the second strongest Shurima champion here in the ratings, which is also a bit surprising to me. I would expect to see maybe things like Sejuani or even Nasus higher up. I think Nasus Thresh had a very good start to the expansion, had a very high win rate, some big streamers playing it as well, and a high play rate. So I'm surprised not to see Nasus instead of Sivir.
I think, one reason might be that Nasus and Thresh are a bit easier to interact with than Sivir, because she's hides behind the spell shield plus quick attack, and it can sometimes be very tough to get rid of her no matter how hard you try.
Yeah. We actually did a prediction before but I didn't make it so we can show this and make a nice little thing out of it, but I can quickly mention it. For the top, we did top 10 champions each before the results came in, Lobster and me, to see just a little game. I guessed 7 out of 10 correctly, but the 6 first ones, it was in the exact same order. So I've done a lot of these surveys. I know Reddit's mindset perfectly. I can delve into all your minds and know exactly what you're thinking at all times. It's a superpower now. And Lobster got 8 out of 10, so he got more correct, but in a more of a alphabet soup order, not quite. But you did win this one. I'll give you that win. We'll move on now to bottom 15 champs. This is a more depressing graph to look at. The bars are a lot smaller. Size does matter here, and Lulu has the smallest of them all. I think it's a record low. It's a 1.33 rating, so very sad. I'm just gonna quickly go over the champions that I maybe think don't deserve to be so low, or that I think it's more a perception thing and not so much a power level, and then you can kind of contrast. I think Diana, she's been seeing play in Aphelios, and I think in her own niche with Nightfall, maybe not being so popular, but I think she's a good champion. She has her own little thing. She can easily be a 2.6, 2.7, kind of a low average rating. I think Maokai has problems. There's not really too many mill cards that are helping the archetype out, I think. It's just missing a lot of identity. Yasuo has problems with maybe if Yone were to draw him, that would improve things, but with consistency and maybe sometimes in the early game having, just a bit problem with the archetype itself. It's always had problems. I think Vi could be rated higher. She has, this is a low rating, like a 2-point rating is this deserves a buff, like strongly, and also this survey is a survey that we had 10 champions under 2.0, which is unheard of. We usually only have 1 or 2, especially without Vladimir being here, so it would have been 11. But Lobster, I think we can both take credit for literally boosting Vladimir 0.60. We'll see later in the stats, but he's at 2.60 now, and he was always like 1.7, so almost like a 0.80 maybe boost. But I'm gonna highlight, I think Vi, I think Lux, I think Nocturne. I think Nightfall has always been a decent archetype, not bad, not like win rate wise as well. And I think Taric can be broken. I think we saw it now recently with a Aegis deck that someone posted, I think in top 20. I think Legends of Runeterra is his name. Hope that's right. But I think he has potential to without any changes, with new cards being added or just new brews being played, I think he has potential to be a little bit better than is shown here. Do you agree with those, or do you think there's any others to highlight as champions that you think might not be this low actually?
Yeah, this is a very interesting one to look at, because there are a couple of cards that, again, standalone are kind of good, but the packages around the cards are just not worth playing. Riven is a perfect example. A 3-mana 3/4 with card generation. In itself is kind of nuts, but it's a lot of the support package is just not worth filling your deck with. Vi is, like you mentioned, I'm also a bit surprised, but I think the main reason is because you run into so much Targon, and Hush just completely obliterating Vi.
Yeah.
If Hush doesn't exist, Vi is super solid.
Yeah. I think maybe it's Vi doesn't have like she's very versatile. Maybe you can put her in a lot of different decks, and she has like a very vanilla playstyle and effect. Maybe with more card generation with gems, etc. That's the highlight deck for her. But I think she doesn't have her own archetype. Doesn't create her own space, and that might be the problem as well. Well, there's always gonna be a better option instead of Vi because it's more specific or more precise to what you're trying to do. She's like maybe two jack of all trades, I think, in her effect, and like it's not really unique to anything in PNZ either.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think a lot of these high-rated cards are characterized by going for some flashy win condition or some crazy pop-off turn, like basically something unfair. And most of these cards are too vanilla-ish. They would marvel in a mid-rangey meta where it comes down to stats being important, but right now it's more about certain interaction aspects, getting certain combos to pop off, and a lot of these cards, like for example Lux or Vi, I think just don't contribute enough there.
Yeah, I agree. And then just a quick recap, I think the cards that definitely do have problems and I think have to be reworked or need a better support cast and cards that changed or added, I think we can agree are Lulu, Katarina, Shyvana, Heimer. Talia is unfinished, I think, with the next after Shurima fully releases. Then I think we can judge. But I think those four for sure, and Jarvan I think has some issues as well in just maybe how he works. I haven't played myself. I don't really know what the problem might be, but just looking at play rates and him being newly released especially, and having just abysmal play rates and win rates and play rate, just people not really enjoying him. I think those are the main ones to highlight, and Maokai I think as well. I think Mill needs if I don't know how bad it would be to make Mill a strong strategy or a very relevant strategy, but when you play Maokai, you think, where am I going with this? There's Maokai, but what else is there to make Mill? There's not like too many things that make your opponent draw a card, like maybe Foundry, but I think it's missing more cards to support that archetype, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think Maokai might make a comeback if we get additional cards added to the deep package. Just, maybe they'll add Pike to the game. Who knows? A card like J4 is an interesting one because he really only marvels when he's leveled, but it's not worth building a deck around leveling him. And in his core, he's also kind of a tempo card with the summon from hand effect. He's usually just played as an open attack addition to your attack. It's a bit of a weird spot to be in. But I agree on the other champs that need reworks, and I would personally also add Karma just because of the reasons I mentioned before. Kind of a mechanic that gets harder and harder to balance.
We'll look at
the more cards get added to the game.
We'll look at the stats, the full stats in a bit to see the kind of middling champions. But Karma was a 2.49, I think, out of 5, and Diana's a 2.3, so not far off here actually. Last but not least, we're going to look at the controversial card rating graph. This is just the individual cards, not champions, and that I think is the most exciting one to look at as well. And this is it. Wiggly Burblefish alongside TF and almost the same exact score. Instead of a 4.8, it's a 4.79. Tops the charts with Temple as a very close second and Star Shaping as a much further third. So I think those two cards, Burblefish and Temple, are definitely, I think, overtuned. They're definitely just additions onto what's already two very, very oppressive decks and archetypes with TF Fizz and Aphelios and Targon in general. And I think they're both very clearly overtuned. I mean, it's not like a minor thing. It's something that, something's very wrong with Burblefish. When the card first came out and the first survey I did maybe early February, I think, or late January, I already mentioned that this card, just reading it and seeing it, maybe not soon, but it's going to start getting traction and people are going to break this card with the deck that has a lot of spells. It's very efficient at drawing with iterative improvement, etc. And that was indeed the case. So anything to add to these two cards, or do you just agree that they're quite overtuned?
Yeah, they're definitely overtuned. I think they're both already very strong standalone cards. Just in even Gohard tried splashing Burblefish, it was already strong, and then you have these crazy combos just pushing them over the top, like iterative improvement. Not much more to be said.
That's why I knew that Burblefish would become broken, is because I was playing it in Go Hard, and I had never played Go Hard before when Burblefish released, because I don't like playing like the super meta decks. But after 2 months, when it was already kind of at the low and was about to get nerfed, I think I started playing with Burblefish, and I noticed, this card is not just very good, but also just the idea of playing maybe one or two or several Burblefishes at 0 mana is just an unhealthy interaction to add to the game. Your opponent has 0 mana, he can't make plays. That should be a strategic element that you can always count on. and with elusive and all, like such an impactful thing to be able to change the landscape of the board and the turn for 0 mana. I think it should never be in the game. It's just inherently bad from many standpoints. And Temple also, yeah, just cheats a lot of mana, and with Targon and the cast of cards it has alongside it, make it very strong. Star Shaping, much of the same. This is a lot of the stalling aspect of Targon is Star Shaping and the healing and card advantage and invoking not just a card but a very strong card, so like kind of a targeted draw is a combo that I think is just really strong.
Yeah, Star Shaping is an interesting one. I think that's also an issue of just Targon in general being super strong. I'm not sure if the card itself needs a tweak. Like it's you can either tweak the card directly or you can tweak Targon as a whole, and then Star Shaping won't be that accessible, because one of the reasons why it excels is you can afford to spend that 5 mana for the 5 healing and the draw, which, I mean, compared to something like a health potion, 1 mana to heal 3 is not very effective healing, but you can't just afford to do it against aggro decks because you have board control anyway. You have other access to keeping your Nexus healthy, and therefore either hit, like, if the card gets hit directly or the region as a whole, it should make it a bit more fair.
Looking at Dunekeeper at 4.00 exactly. This is a surprising one. I think much of this can be just the fact that you're raiding in a vacuum, and in a vacuum, the card compared to other one-drop is very strong. It's not an oppressive mana card. It's not a card that even in a deck that uses it wisely, like Azir aggro decks, it's not a card that seems the most broken one in the deck. Other combos seem stronger because it is a one-drop, so it won't be as flashy. I think, yeah, much of this can be attributed to just it being in a vacuum and the way that rating works. You're going to vote it a 4 or 5 even, but not really an impressive card. I don't think it'll be changed anytime soon. I think it's okay for regions to have very strong cards, and maybe a 1-1 instead of a 2-1, but again, not really as impactful as this survey would make it seem. Pick a card and stress testing we can put in the same lump, I think, the same bag. And this is mostly to do with the synergy with CF. It's not the cards on their own. Maybe stress testing a little bit because it kind of does just cheat value out of nowhere in terms of card draw if you have the right deck and the build around it. But I think, again, they're not that strong cards. Just the synergy with TF is what makes them so highly rated in this survey.
Yeah, I agree. I think stress testing could get a tiny nerf. For example, if it is fleeting and gets discarded, it doesn't draw you the next card at the start of the next round. Just something tiny like that. Maybe increase the mana cost, but it would make the card more fair. But yeah, the main reason of it being here is getting abused in the PSTF deck, basically.
Going to the next few: Ballistic Bot, Troll Chant, and Hush. I think we can all put into the same bag of being just very strong cards in the regions. Sometimes this is necessary. Sometimes regions have to have these strong cards. I think especially in the case of Ballistic Bomb, I think we maybe spoke about this a bit, that it's just, it creates so many archetypes, and it's such a big foundational deck building tool in PNZ, which is the reason that needed this. This is why PNZ is now more relevant than it was the last 3 or 4 months ago. And it's a card that I think cannot be changed because it needs to exist to make PNZ relevant and have archetypes like Teemo archetypes, like anything spell-based, discard aggro, even burn. I think it's just a super versatile card, one of maybe the most versatile deck building cards in the entire game. And I would stand around defending this card not to be nerfed. I think it's strong, but needed for the game. And Troll Chant, the same thing, strong, but I think it's part of the identity of Freljord and high health kind of stuff and survivability. And Hush, maybe there's a stronger argument for this not being the same pack, but I don't see how you can nerf it again past 3 mana and still make it relevant. It is just Targon's identity, and it's annoying, it's strong, but do you think there's any way to change this card again?
That is a good question. Yeah, I mean, it already got hit a couple of times. I think it's an okay spot right now. I understand absolutely that it's frustrating to lose against it, pretty much. But I do agree with all 3 of these cards. I mean, every card game needs strong cards and worse cards. And I think all of these cards are core cards which are not game-breaking, but just very strong and don't kind of make the game super unfair or frustrating to play. And I think you don't have to tweak them.
I think we can add Sharpsight and Shapestone to these lists, to this group as well. Sure. I think they're just... and things like Glimpse Beyond, etc., but those are already kind of accepted as very strong, and they got nerfed already, and is just a staple of Shadow Isles. But some cards like those, I think those are all examples of the same thing, where there are these very strong, cheap cards that are part of the identity of the region, and you need to have to make deck buildings feel good and make decks feel good, I think, and consistent in their performance. Looking at other cards that are maybe not in the same pack, Zaps Rayfin, always been a very strong card. I think much of its power relies on the cards it tutors and how strong those cards are with Go Hard, with Fervor and some aggro decks, with obviously in TF Fizz with Brumage and some of the other strong low-cost cards, all the spells really, and just the card advantage aspect. I think it's a strong card. Do you think it really needs any nerfs? I think it's kind of fine. What do you think?
Yeah, it's close to Shadow Assassin back in the day.
Yeah.
It's the cards, yeah. Or I'd compare it a bit to Ballistic, but it's strong, but it doesn't necessarily have to be nerfed. And it has been around forever. It has often been an auto-included in a lot of Targon decks, but it doesn't push the game to its edges, and it gives decks more consistency. And I mean, it's fun to play it yourself because you can consistently draw, for example, your Noxian Fervor in Pirate Aggro and just continue with your game plan.
Exactly.
I think the card doesn't have to be nerfed.
It allows for more consistent game plans, I think, and not just in deck building, but in the actual playing the deck. It makes the decks feel good, and yeah, I think it's strong, but somewhat fair. Atrocity is a card that has been discussed a lot over many metas. It's been stronger and less strong depending on what champions were stronger and less strong, and what strategies were stronger or not. I think it's a strong card. I think it does feel bad to lose against it sometimes. But I think it's a fitting card. I think there need to be cards that end games in Runeterra. I think the big problem now with Targon is that games don't end. And, this is a game that's on mobile. This is a game that's supposed to be, for the majority, for 95% of players, a casual game. And you simply cannot have hour-long games that do not end because it just, in a tournament and where you're able to highlight your big brain plays, like you, for example, I assume great. But for the vast majority of players, it is impossible. In the year 2021, where the attention span is so small for everyone, I think, due to the way that the world works now in digital, media and everything, you cannot have hour-long card games. And Atrocity is a card that helps end games, and that's necessary sometimes. I think it's well statted at 6 mana. It's strong in some strategies, but it's a card is there in the strategies to play around, and that's on you, I think, to try and play around. And there are many ways to play around Atrocity, and there's many different counters in all regions, I think.
Absolutely agree. I think the fact that it is so interactable and it comes down so late in the game makes the card kind of okay. I mean, maybe at some point you have to up the mana cost by 1, but I don't think we're here yet. I think it's fine.
Mm-hmm. And if that does happen, I don't think it would kill the card. Kind of like Endure. I mean, Endure did die a bit, but for other reasons maybe. But the mana change didn't make it suddenly. Like, I think I pulled it when it was very strong and it had a very high rating in the card ratings, and then the next survey after it was nerfed, it was still fairly high when it was still meta. So I think it's a card like Atrocity won't be too much of a difference. Maybe with Nautilus is a bit awkward where you play Nautilus and you're able to Atrocity the same turn on turn 10 with Deep, but that's a very fringe thing to look at, I think. Flock, similar to, I think, Ballistic Ball and all these other cards, very strong. Could see maybe a nerf from 4 to 3. I don't think that would be the end of the world. At 4 damage, it is, I think, very strong for 1 mana, but do you see a nerf to 3 damage being the end of the world for it?
No, I think the card would still be very, very playable. And I think that's something that might be more necessary in the near future, because there are just more and more ways of enabling it. More stuns get added to the game, more damaging spells, more pings get added to the game. And that makes the card more consistently available. Basically, the idea behind having a 1 mana deal 4, which would be broken in itself, was let's make it conditional. But the easier the condition is to apply, the better the card gets overall. So I think that one's gonna get a slight nerf eventually.
And especially being Swain's signature spell is also something that we have to discuss, I think. And with TF and pick a card as well. We didn't mention it, but that's also a problem with the card, is that the fact that it is a signature spell and synergizes so well with that champion, and Flock and Swain the same. So when Swain's meta, and when he was meta, it did feel very bad. And it was, I think, top 4 actually was like a 4.0 at its highest point a few surveys ago. So I wouldn't be surprised to see this card eventually at some point get nerfed to 3 damage. I think it doesn't change the card too much, and it's still going to be quite relevant. Boxtopus, merely a product of Crescendum, I think. And it's fine to have these kind of broken combos that you deck build and, my brain is so big for thinking of this. Whoever the first guy to do it was, congrats to you. Everyone else, no credit for you guys. But I think it's fine to have these deck building combos that kind of reward the player for being original or innovating a little bit in that regard and doing things that don't seem inherently like obvious, I think. Playing around the weaknesses of the card, for example. But I think it's mostly just Aphelios being a problem. Once Aphelios is not a problem, or Crescendum is not a problem, then Boxtopus, he shouldn't be nerfed just because of this interaction, I think. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely agree. Rather hit Aphelios than Boxtopus.
Okay, good. If not, we would have had a serious talk here. Ruin Runner, a strong card with Spell Shield, of course, very, very strong. I don't think it's anywhere near oppressive in a vacuum. Same with Doomkeeper, I think. It does seem very strong. Maybe in the future, if more tools or more cards get added to Shurima that help it, and you know, we're still missing a big part of Shurima's game plan and archetypes and everything. So we'll see. I think we can't really judge this yet, but I think it should definitely be kind of a watch list kind of card. With its stat line and the spell shield, it feels like a champion sometimes. You know, there's some decks I was building at the beginning of Shurima that I thought, well, why add a champion when I can just add a Ruin Runner? Why add Darius when I can add a better Darius that has spell shield?
Absolutely agree. At this point, it's still more of an auto-include card than a really problematic card. But if you find more ways of abusing the combination of Overwhelm and Spell Shield, like more crazy buffs out of nowhere, then the card can become problematic.
Looking at quickly grouping in Blighted Caretaker and Doombeast, two cards that I've always thought should have been in this list, now are on this list. They're not broken. They're maybe not even watchlist territory, but they're cards that I think are definitely above their pay grade and are definitely cards that we should kind of consider in the future to see how different archetypes work. Now with Doombeast, we saw some decks in the last fight night with Unto Dust and all these different ways of copying Doombeast to just burn your opponent down and heal yourself as well. The Doombeast's effect is just very strong. I think just on paper, just heal 2, drain 2 on 3 on a nicely statted or decently statted 3 mana unit is quite strong, and Caretaker as well with its effects and its synergies with Curse Keeper, etc. Rite of Negation, interesting card, 3.58 rating. Deny has a 3.29 for comparison. And this is obviously rated 0.30 higher, even though most people consider it a worse Deny due to its limitations. I think it could be lower. I think it shouldn't really be in this list. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think the reason why it's ranked higher than Deny is just because the region sees a bit more play and is a bit stronger.
Yeah.
And they have the same frustration factor, like your Nasus opponent plays an atrocity, you try to interact with it, it gets denied. It's like, I mean, I tried, but I can't. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't think the card is OP in itself, no.
And these cards have to exist to keep in check, you know, cards like Feel the Rush and Ruination and Harrowing, etc. And yeah, I mean, it's part of the game. Quick reminder, Deny used to be 3 mana, just letting you guys know. We lived in a meta and in a world where that occurred. So Burblefish, sometimes, you know, it'll pass. I think we'll get past this. Other very, very dangerous things have occurred in this game already in the past. Concurrent Timelines is one of those that could have been potentially dangerous. I think the combo with Ledros and Dreadway was unintended. I think the devs confirmed this, actually. They didn't really consider this. And it was very oppressive, but I think the card by itself is a very good card. It's a very cool card. It's a card that rewards innovative and original deck building. It suddenly creates, maybe not archetypes, I guess, yeah, archetypes on their own. Of maybe with every single region, you can create an archetype that has these, you know, where can I get value out of this with certain units that are low statted but have a good play effect. And I think it's something that's definitely good to have in the game because it just creates more diversity. It's just a great deck building companion, I think. And that combo is broken, but again, same as Boxtopus, I think the correct thing here is if it's needed, it's to nerf that specific combo and not the card itself.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It creates interesting moments, basically. As long as the card is not completely overtuned, or these combos that you mentioned are not overtuned, the card's going to be fine.
Yep. And I think that's everything here, Portal Cannon. Just TF Fizz, I think. It's a strong card, but not too much more to mention. And we are nearing the 1 hour mark, so we done fucked up, Lobster. But this will be it for the graphs. We're going to just quickly look at the stats to end things off to see what we've missed that you know, is kind of in the middle for the champions, for examples. And here we're seeing it now. So just quickly, I'm going to go over maybe my thoughts on some of the champions that we see here in the middle that weren't on any of the graphs because they weren't as relevant. I can also go off of the changes from last survey to this one that I have by memory. You can't see them here, but you'll see them on the write-up on Reddit if you do read that at the same time that this video's out. Nasus, we talked about, and Sejuani, Jinx, Ezreal, Elise. I think these are all just staple champions in the regions. Strong, but not too strong or anything like that. I think they're correct in this very healthy 3.0 rating. LeBlanc had a good showing in the meta. She was obviously, her flavor was not great for most people that from League that know how the character worked and everything. Didn't like it too much, but ended up being one of the more surprising, I think, champions in terms of play rate and win rate and relevance in the meta, I think, past this last expansion. Hecarim found a bit of a slump after Grand Plaza got nerfed, and the Azir deck's not really being that impactful, I think, in how it worked out, and obviously very weak to stuns, etc. as a 6-mana drop, just negating all of its attack potential. Everything else, Renekton, decent. Thresh had a big upswing because of Nasus, and, great to see it, of course, to see him in a better spot, although he hasn't been changed. And yeah, everything else, Vladimir, I think, is the big one to mention that we talked about. The deck has barely changed. Bloodletter's come in and Ice Shard has come in. They are impactful things, yes, but maybe not enough to propulse a champion up like 0.80 rating. I think I mentioned this before on other podcasts I was on as well, that this is a perfect example of a deck that it's 100% perception. If everyone thinks it's a meme, it's going to be a meme, and someone can play it, but it'll be a meme, and then when they win with it, they'll think, oh, I'm winning, but it's a meme and I'm just getting lucky, whatever it is. But the moment that someone like Ice-T starts playing it and really defending it, then you start playing it and you pretty much get to Masters with it, with your own version of it. I take that version, change a few cards. I don't get to Masters because I had a terrible slump after for some reason, but I went like 17-4 and climbed from Diamond 4 to Diamond 1 with a new deck that was fun. I posted on Twitter, someone else posted it, Sorry started playing it, he won a tournament with it, and then all of a sudden, the high-end community and the pro player content creator community, at the high end where like Reddit and like very hardcore players congregate, it really shows how impactful it is. The play rate on Mobalytics at Platinum Plus went up to like 3 or 4%, which is a huge increase for a deck that was a meme. And the perception of the champion suddenly climbs, even though it was a meme a little while ago, the worst champion in the game for 2 years or a year and a half, however long Runeterra has been out. And he's seen no changes since that last buff. So I think it's a perfect example of how much perception matters in card games.
Absolutely agree. A lot of these champions in this mid section around 3 points are not overtuned by themselves, and they're also like they don't have overtuned packages, and they basically bounce in and out of play and in and out of the meta depending on the decks they face. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes them neither overpowered nor underpowered, I think. A card like Teemo is a good example. Not super strong in it by itself, but whenever Targon dominates the meta, you can play the Puffcap package, kind of counter it, and it's gonna go up in the ratings a bit, but never gonna be like OP.
Yeah, when you're not too weak and you're not too strong, and you're at the mercy of what's meta, and that kind of reflects on how much play rate you have, and because of that, how much perception impact you have, and how much people think you're strong or weak, even though you haven't changed across meta. So yeah, I perfectly agree. And as usually I look at everything 2.50 and above is fine, is healthy, and these from 2.50 to 3.15 or so is the range where champions can go up and down and not usually change too much. Above 3.10 or so, these champions are pretty much always going to be unless they get changed, because they're just a little bit stronger than usual, but still not too strong. Things like Elise, even like Sejuani, Jinx, etc., they have a very strong archetype, and they're going to be there, but they're not that oppressive. So yeah, I totally agree with that. But that is the middling thing. You can just pause it if you want to look at most of these stats, and find it also on Reddit with a write-up and all the graphs and everything on my Twitter as well. Everything else we've talked about. General ratings, the game balance and deck diversity have gone down by almost a full point each. I think this is the worst meta we've been in, from a standpoint of how oppressive decks have been, the factors that have led to this happening, with kind of Christmas not seeing any nerf because of the holidays, then the release of Aphelios, the February patch. It was right when TF Fizz was starting to actually rise, and TF Fizz was kind of a meme when it started being played. They had good ladder results, but people weren't considering it to be a very strong deck. With Fizz and Mind Meld, like, they were like, oh, what does this mean? The next, it'll phase out in a week. And it happened right as the survey came out. The survey didn't hit at all, and that's where it really just let it go loose for like a month and a half. I think that's where we've gotten now. And with Stream expansion, I think the devs are seeing expansions as kind of balanced patches, because they're adding new cards and hoping those cards do enough to change the meta and not have to balance, because the less devs balance in their eyes, I think the better, because they think the game is auto-correcting itself and they shouldn't be the ones to like dictate that. But that was clearly not the case with Shurima. Not impactful enough as a region as a whole was released, or just Targon and TF being too strong, and it, no matter what was released, it wouldn't change that. And then this last should have been balanced patch 2.40, didn't happen, and that led to us here now. So Really bad ratings. You can't sugarcoat it. It's the worst by a long shot that we've ever seen in all the surveys that I've done. But I think can be addressed, can be fixed, and the game as a whole, and the devs, and how it's been till now. I think nothing to really have any nightmares about or think the game's dying or anything. I think it's not really going to be the case. Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I'm very hopeful about what the future brings after the patch because the game is more diverse than it has ever been. It's just struggling from the absence of an almost necessary emergency nerf to some of those very frustrating cards, and some of those cards are definitely overtuned. And I think as soon as the meta just gets shuffled again, and no one knows what the best decks are, the satisfaction and probably also just the player activity is going to rise overall.
This change of scene indicates that we have near to the end of the podcast. I'm dying now, right at the end.
Damn.
That is it. I thought it would be 30-minute. I don't know what the attention span looks like on YouTube nowadays. This is a hardcore video for the hardcore fans, so maybe it's fine. I'm not sure. Let me know in the comments below if this is too much, if this is too long, if we should condense it next time. And I guess subscribe, comment, like. That's what YouTubers say nowadays. I might make more content in the future. I'm not going to make any promises because I have done this in the past and then I haven't done it. But I do like Runeterra a lot. I am getting very involved from a casting perspective, from content perspective in some ways with surveys, etc. So it's natural to me to kind of evolve this into YouTube as well. It's more work, but I have the time. If you guys want to see this kind of stuff and maybe more in-depth pro player interviews and esport kind of related stuff and analysis stuff, and not so much casual, just gameplay, here's a deck, here's me playing it, I don't think that's really anything exclusive or anything worth making a video about. But if you want very specific stuff and high tier stuff and analysis based and stat based stuff, let me know in the comments below, and if I see a good reception, I will definitely consider it and do more of this stuff. And definitely the surveys, I think this format worked well despite the length maybe, but I think it should be a cool video. Lobster, thanks for joining me. It was my pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. It did turn out longer than we expected, but it was super fun. And there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about right now.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so long. I think it's purely just a lot to talk about. All these stats, a lot to analyze and really go through. I think from our perspective that we're really very involved with the game, so it makes sense to really spend a lot of time talking about it if we're passionate about it as well. But yeah, if you're seeing this video and you haven't seen the actual write-up and the results on Reddit, then you're in the wrong order, so go to that. I'll link it somewhere in the description, and you can see all the graphs as well to take on your own time on my Twitter as well. You can follow Lobster on his Twitter tag there. I think I got it right. And yes, mine as well. I'm the same everywhere. Maybe I'll stream in the future as well, but again, no promises. We'll see about that. But thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed, and see you guys later.